University has been the leading institution in the Philippines for creativity, innovation, and academic excellence. A dynamic sandbox for the best minds and thinkers across the country, Ateneo is both a birthplace of ideas and an engine of innovation. Here, we never stop creating a vision of a better future. As a university for the 21st century, Atechievas as a force for the greater good. Being a part of Ateneo is being a part of history. Our roots date all the way back to 1859, when Spanish Jesuits established the Escuela Municipal de Manila, a public primary school in the walled city of Intramuros. Since then, the school has flourished in many places, from its beginnings in Intramuros and Padre Faura to where it currently stands in Loyola Heights. An Ateneo education is shaped by three core values, stemming from its founder's Ignatian roots. Excellence. Embodying Lux in Domino, students, faculty, and staff strive for excellence in everything they do. We believe in a holistic approach to human development. Through academics, athletics, and social engagement, we guide our students to be the best of who they are. Magis. As a home of future pioneers and trailblazers, the Ateneo education calls for magis. More considered thought for decisive action, more experimentation for discovery, and always doing more for the greater good. Cura personalis, body, mind, heart, and soul. In Ateneo, every member of the community is seen, valued, and essential. Beyond academic standing, this care extends to one's mental health, spirituality, and overall well-being. Ateneo is where future leaders are made. Guided by Ignatian principles, our basic education molds each student into a young individual who is a change maker, a nation builder, and the catalyst of progress in the global community. In grade school, they gain social skills, academic competence, and a commitment to Christian values. In junior high school, they discover themselves, hone their talents and abilities, and develop their leadership skills. In senior high school, they learn to grasp abstract ideas in order to deal with real-world issues and challenges. Our basic education is centered on the 5 C's: Christ-centered, competent in every aspect, empowered with a well-formed conscience, compassionate, and committed to serve the country and the global community. At the threshold of professional life and public service, higher education at Ateneo offers a constellation of world-class programs and facilities. 9 schools form a globally competitive center of excellence. The School of Law, the Graduate School of Business, the School of Government, the School of Medicine and Public Health, the Gokongwei Brothers School of Education and Learning Design, the School of Science and Engineering, the Dr. Rosita G. Leong School of Social Sciences, the John Gokongwei School of Management, the School of Humanities. Ateneo is also home to several specialized centers, like the Ateneo Teacher Center, the Ateneo Salt Institute, Arete, and more. Arete stands at the intersection of all these disciplines, the hub of creativity and innovation at Ateneo, a generative space. It features theaters such as the Hyundai Hall, the Black Box Theater, and the Amphitheater. It has studios and laboratories such as the Sandbox Zone and the Makerspace, where ideas and communities spark invention. And at the Ateneo Art Gallery, you can be inspired and explore the nation's largest collection of Filipino contemporary art. Le Cordon Bleu Ateneo de Manila is at Arete, a premium learning institution that brings together the finest culinary educational programs of Le Cordon Bleu with Ateneo's premium business and management expertise. Our professors are industry leaders. From the country's major thinkers and change makers, there is no dearth in the number of experts and professionals in their fields. As Ateneo goes forward into the future, the university's 2021 to 2030 strategic plan is focused on 4 priority areas: education reform and transformation, integral ecology, universal health and well-being, bridging cultural divides. We will achieve all this by harnessing the power of digital technology, expanding programs of continuing and lifelong learning, and establishing strategic partnerships and effective collaboration. By 2030, Ateneo will be fully co-educational and recognized as a Laudato Si University. Staying true to the motto of being lux in domino, or light in the Lord, Ateneo is committed to be a force for good, always seeking innovative answers and sustainable solutions to society's most pressing challenges. At Ateneo, we prepare one to be ready for tomorrow.
everyone, and welcome to the inaugural lecture of Ateneo Breakthroughs at the Ideas That Change the World. We will begin this afternoon. We welcome our host, Ms. Pia Ontiveros Pagkalinawan.
Hello everybody, and magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to Ateneo Breakthroughs, Ideas That Change the World. This is the Ateneo de Manila University's flagship public lecture series that we are launching today. Emphasis on the Ateneo. Because we're the only university that can say the before our name, hindi ba? Correct me if I'm wrong. Is there any other university that can? Anyway, well, Ateneo Breakthrough brings research and creative work to life for all of us, clearly, responsibly, and in the service of the common good, and, might I add, mindfully. So thank you very much for being here. Students, who are the students here? Students, you don't have a class now, no? Or is this is this a requirement? No. Oh, that's nice, huh? They're here for you, Josh. Okay. So you're the only students? Wala na iba? Students here. There, okay, student. Requirement? No. No. Students over there? Okay. Are you here for what? It's okay, you can talk. It's a free country. Go ahead. Wala pang martial law, ha? You're here for what nga? I'm asking. Sorry, what? To listen. Oh, that's good. Very good, very good. Okay. Students, faculty. There are other faculty here. Where's the faculty? There. Of course, Doc Tina Montiel, who I used to interview many moons ago. And over there, ma'am, and sir and ma'am. Yeah, hi. Fellow faculty, because I also teach here. I teach an elective, broadcast journalism. Only my third sem. So far, I'm surviving. Administrators, I think Matic Villanueva is here or was here. And of course, I'm going to acknowledge Dr. Vilches in a bit. Partners, colleagues, and friends. Allow me also first to, like I said, acknowledge the presence of Dr. Maria Luz or Marlu Vilches, Vice President for Higher Education. Thank you, ma'am, for being here. And of course, we will know why she's here in a bit. So I have to introduce myself. So I'm Pia Ontiveros. I am a journalist. I have been a journalist for about 35 years, teaching here part-time for a free elective broadcast journalism, like I said earlier. I am also a graduate of the Ateneo, and I am not the senator. I'm the sister, younger sister. And you can add whatever you want. Okay, so I'm your host today, and I will also facilitate the open forum later. We are going now to listen first to Dr. Marlu Vilches, because she's going to open this premiere session of Ateneo Breakthroughs. This is, after all, her brainchild. She gave the marching orders for this, and she's going to introduce our speaker also. Ma'am?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So we have faculty, scholars, students, guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to this inaugural lecture in the Ateneo Breakthrough Series, spearheaded actually by the Office of the Assistant VP for Research, Creative Work, and Innovation under the leadership of Dr. June Aguilar, who's here. Ateneo de Manila has come a long way in terms of producing research that really matters, with great impact in addressing societal issues that cut across disciplines. This is one of the reasons for being a university, to be part of substantial conversations that advance thinking and influence, we hope, public policies on life issues through one of the things that we do best, that is, knowledge production and dissemination of such knowledge. So this Ateneo Breakthrough Series is a way of disseminating such knowledge. As the gospel admonishes us to be the light of the world, we cannot put that light under a bowl. Instead, We have to put it on its stand so that it can give light to everyone in the house, so that we can let our light shine before others for His greater glory. We begin with this lecture on narratives, networks, and democracy today, a very relevant topic that gives us a window of opportunity to reflect on what counts for meaning in a world that has transitioned to cyberspace and requires an entirely new set of sensibilities to navigate life in that sphere. When I was considering giving these opening remarks, I was looking at Josh as a scholar here, and I was also pondering on the theme. And the image of Hamlet talking to his friend Horatio came to mind. Hamlet said, "There are many things in heaven and on earth that are not dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio." And indeed, even in Elizabethan England, Shakespeare came to this realization. What would Shakespeare say today? But at least we are confronting the undreamt of realities with method, even with madness. And there is more to do, but I hope that this lecture will open opportunities for students and other members of the faculty to delve deeper into other related issues and be part of this ongoing conversation in the interest of clarity and meaning making. So now, let me introduce the person behind this lecture. Our speaker today is Dr. Joshua Uyheng, a computational social scientist who is now assistant professor in the Department of Psychology and director of the Political Psychology of Democratization Laboratory of the Dr. Rosita G. Leong School of Social Sciences here in this university. As an undergraduate student in this university, Josh earned his BS Psychology and BS Mathematics degrees summa cum laude. Just an aside note that I cannot forget, when I was a new VP in this university, I was trying to get us working on the Digital Martial Law Museum, and Josh, as an undergraduate student then, was a significant member of the team of alumni who formed the brains and the preliminary logistics behind what we have now as the Digital Martial Law Museum. So I'd like to thank Josh for that here publicly. And let me continue to tell the narrative of his academic journey so far. After graduation from this university, Josh proceeded to do his master's and doctoral studies in Carnegie Mellon University, where he earned his PhD in societal computing. There, Dr. Uyheng studied the large-scale narrative and network dynamics of online hate. He has since received awards from the Asian Association of Social Psychology, the Psychological Association of the Philippines, and the Philippine Department of Science and Technology. He also serves as on the editorial board of PLOS One, or Public Library of Science One, and the Journal of Social and Political Psychology. We're proud to present our very own, the unassuming, young, and brilliant scholar with a heart, no longer just a whiz kid, Dr. Josh Uyheng.
Hello? Oh, there. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Doc Marlu, for such a warm introduction, and thank you, everyone, for coming to see this show. The setup, the headphones, I really feel like a K-pop demon hunter today. So, thank you. Yes, and on a more serious note, no, it's an honor really to stand here and share a little bit about this research Like I said, I'd like to thank Dr. Marlu Vilches, Dr. June Aguilar of RCWI, Ms. Pia Ontiveros for agreeing to host today, and of course the teams from RCWI, UMCO, DITS, and the psychology department, all of whose support really helped make this event happen. So first time when we were meeting to figure out this event, they said, let's fail forward. And I kind of got a little bit nervous. I don't want to be failing forward, but we'll see how this works out. And yeah, so thank you for letting me open this event. No? So my name is Joshua Uyheng, and I direct our Political Psychology of Democratization lab. I'm also an assistant professor at the psychology department at our Dr. Rosita G. Leong School of Social Sciences here in Ateneo. My talk today is on narratives, networks, and democracy today. And when they were asking me what I wanted to talk about, I really thought of it as such a rare and unique opportunity to, even as a junior scholar, I still consider myself junior, to reflect on years now of research and scholarship. And what I realized, what these three words, narratives, networks, and democracy, really encapsulated the academic journey and the questions that have animated my career. These are also, as my undergrad social psychology teacher would say, big words. And so I'd like to maybe put these words together through the lens of maybe a simpler word, stories. We tell ourselves stories in order to live, writes Joan Didion. And those of you who know me from back in college will laugh at this introduction because this was also one of our favorite quotes in my organization, which was Heights, the literary publication. Joan Didion says this because we look for the logic behind events to make them make sense. We look for lessons, even in tragedy, or sometimes especially in tragedy, because we like to construct meaning. At times we want to impose meaning. Didion actually wrote this. It sounds a little bit inspiring, but she wrote this actually in a very ironic way. She said this in the context of great turbulence at the time for America in the 60s and 70s, so now 50, 60 years ago. And she's a writer. She's a journalist, an essayist, and all of that. But she was writing about stories saying that she doubted the premise of all the stories she had told herself. She described herself as someone who had mislaid the script, who could hear no cues and could only write as an attempt to believe in intelligibility. So when she says we tell ourselves stories in order to live, she's talking about, in one sense, a need. You could say she's talking about a manner of deluding ourselves in the face of a senseless world, but perhaps on the other hand, you could also think about it as a form of resistance to that senselessness, a way to live and a way to live despite. And so stories are very powerful, and today I want to use the concept of story to bring to the ground the two first big words, narratives and networks. So narratives, or the stories themselves, ask us, what stories do we tell? And an interesting thing about stories is that as we tell them, they also say something about the teller. What do our stories tell about us? The second big word in my title is networks. So I like to think about our networks. They can be a very mathematical concept, but in the context of today's talk, you can really think about them as our communities of storytelling. Who tells our stories with us? And to whom do we tell our stories? Our storytelling doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with other people, right? And we become people, we become who we are not just because of our stories in isolation, but in how we tell our stories together. From this perspective, I'd also like to propose that we can think about democracy itself in terms of stories. Democracy, of course, definitionally is a political system where power resides in the people. But the way that power is exercised, or indeed contained, configured, or at times controlled, depends on stories. Democracy depends on the stories we tell ourselves, stories we tell each other. This is the more technical one, the stories that structure the production, distribution, and utilization of power. Um, it also depends on the stories we believe. It matters whether democracy itself is a story that we believe in. And it matters the way we do and don't believe in democracy. So for Joan Didion 50 years ago, and as it turns out for many of us today, that belief is not something to take for granted. In 2020, we were conducting a study with Filipinos, and one of them shared, as part of our data gathering, while the previous administrations have been more peaceful, they are no better than the current administration. So this current refers to the Duterte administration at the time. We failed to help typhoon victims. Our leaders stole from the country. There are flaws and injustices from each administration, and they are gravely worse because they haven't been dealt with, and they are continuously forgiven and let go by the masses, which only encourages these officials to abuse their power. The Philippines has been going through a cycle of the rich and powerful abusing the weak and poor. So that's one story of democracy today, and it's a very familiar one. It's one we've probably heard from our loved ones in public, whether online or offline, or perhaps even ourselves in times of frustration and doubt, like there's no hope. But it's not the only story. Many stories shape democracy today, and many acts of storytelling shape that production, distribution, and utilization of power. These are the narratives and networks that our research has sought to study for the last 10 years or so, and it really makes me awkward to say that. Okay. So of course there are many ways to study stories. I see within the room, journalists, other kinds of writers, other disciplines that study stories. But the research I'll be talking about specifically uses an approach that we call computational social science. It's in blue and red as a color code to break down what it is, what computational social science is. So the blue part, or the computational part, refers to the use of computational methods, and this includes text analysis, network analysis, and machine learning. So these are things that you would normally associate with the School of Science and Engineering. No, so the math department, computer science department, these are the departments that do a lot of this sort of thing. It takes texts, networks, algorithms, and tries to find insights based on the patterns that emerge from this kind of data. But the red part, the social science, is the study naman of social phenomena. So we use computational methods to look at thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, perhaps on the individual level, but also collective meaning, emotion, and action on the group level and on the societal level. So today, what I'll be talking about is really the result of looking at democracy through these lenses, through these methods, and through these approaches. So what do we learn when we study stories and storytelling this way? So the first bit, how do we study narratives? It turns out we can learn a lot about the stories people tell through the words that they use. If I say corruption, or good governance, or strong leader, all of those words mean something, and they tell a story. And these different words might tell different stories. But more specifically, and this is where the computational methods really come in, is you can use these methods to measure what words are used together. And more to the point, the words that come together consistently in a mathematical, statistically significant way, right? So, so from this standpoint, we can ask, in what stories does democracy, for example, come as a package deal with concepts like freedom? To you, is democracy freedom? Is the story of democracy a story of freedom? Alternatively, in what stories does democracy get linked to human rights and equality? Is democracy to you about equality or protecting the vulnerable? Are these stories the same story? And whose stories are they? So using these methods, using a computational social science approach, we learned that in fact, we are telling vastly different stories about our democracy. If you've ever heard of a normal curve, then my statistics kids should know that it's a bell-shaped thing symmetrical, with an average value where everything clusters together. Hello to the stats students. This is obviously not that, right? This is not a normal curve. Instead, what you see is that the language that we use, the words that we use are split. And they are split, the words that we use together are split. And the words we use together are split consistently across large records of talk and text. And that split is not even close. No? There's maybe a tiny bump in the middle, but for the most part, we occupy the extremes. Our political narratives, then, are, in the words of our Looks in Domino goals, characterized by a vast cultural divide. And this is something we can see empirically. So here's my audience participation part that I threatened my students with. So this is one of the studies that we use to look at that cultural divide in a more systematic way. In a study of thousands of Facebook comments about Duterte's push for federalism, so this was back in, 2018, 2019, we used our computational methods to look at the texts, no longer us manually looking at the texts, but rather the algorithms looking at the text, to classify them based first on stance, whether they were supportive of federalism or they opposed it. And the second thing was based on sentiment. So were they expressing a positive feeling or a negative feeling? And you might wonder, how are stance and sentiment different? Well, I hope this part will, this part of the presentation will explain that. Stance is about your political alignment. Sentiment refers to the valence of the emotion, so positive and negative. So I'd like you all now to think about what emotions you might expect to see in each of these quadrants. For folks that are supportive of federalism and expressing a positive emotion, what emotion do you expect to see there? I'll ask ano lang, my planted answer. Sige, Frodo. Ano yun sa'yo? Just guess. A positive emotion, supportive of federalism. Oh, my mic pa. Go. Thank you, ma'am. Oo nga, birthday.
Something to do about nationalism?
Nationalism, okay. How about you, miss? Would you like to try? Just a positive emotion that you think federalism supporters were experiencing. Think of emotion.
I was thinking po, support for the Duterte administration.
Support. Okay. Great. Thank you. I think you're on the right track. What we found actually in this quadrant was hope and euphoria. Of course, you might contest, like, is hope a feeling? But in our case, what we were seeing was hope and euphoria were good labels for the kinds of texts that we were observing in this quadrant. And you'll notice we actually also have a quantitative component here. If this quadrant were to be uniformly distributed, that would be 25, 25, 25, 25. And here instead we're seeing 80%. So that's very, very far from uniform distribution, right? So something's going on both qualitatively and quantitatively. For those supporting federalism and expressing positive feelings, there was a strong emotion of hope. Those who looked at federalism and said, this is good for the country, were not just saying, like, on a cognitive level, I support this, I feel nationalistic about this. It's hope and it's euphoria. If you've ever felt euphoria, it's like that, right? It's not like this, it's like that. So that was the emotion here on the top left. There's another emotion I'd like to ask this side of the room about. Okay, how about those that opposed federalism and expressed a negative feeling? Sir. Okay.
Anger?
Anger, I like that. Thank you. Are you feeling angry today? Okay, thank you. Sorry, ma'am?
Despair.
Despair, okay. I think if this were... Okay, I'll just speak with my own mic, thank you. If this were an exam, I think Doc Marlu is a little bit closer. Here, what we saw was fear and skepticism. Not actually anger, although that will come out in a different quadrant, so thank you anyway. So what we saw here was if people were opposed to federalism and expressing negative feelings, they were experiencing fear and skepticism. They were afraid. They were afraid. They were afraid of the kind of change that federalism would bring about. And they were skeptical that it was really like what it was supposed to be, or like what it was being packaged to be. And what else do you notice besides the qualitative emotion label is the quantitative proportion, which is just 5%. So those that were opposed to federalism in our data set and expressing a negative feeling, they were 1/16 of those in the top left quadrant. So a significant drop off there. Okay? So this is what you might call, again, from a mathematics standpoint, the main diagonal. And I think if you think about our divided society, you might think about, okay, those supporting federalism, expressing a positive emotion, they're hopeful, they're euphoric. Those that are opposed to federalism and expressing a negative feeling, they are fearful and skeptical. But there's also what you have here as the off diagonal, and it's actually also really interesting to see what's going on there. For those that supported federalism and expressed negative feelings, what we found was what we called vindictive contempt. So this is actually where the angry people were. No? And there was a kind of anger that was kind of, the vindictive part was about, finally, at last. No? So it was the sense that people were finally getting what they had long deserved, but they had also been long deprived of. So it was a righteous kind of anger. And then finally, on the top right, and I'd like you to kind of think about what is a way to oppose federalism but expresses a positive feeling. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but it turns out it's derisive amusement. So it's amusement, it's laughter, but it's a mocking kind of laughter. And what's really interesting is that this analysis is not just about looking for the labels, it's also looking at, as I've been talking about, the stories behind these emotions. If we go back to the words that define each category, we can actually get a sense of the stories that these emotions tell. And you'll forgive me for my Tagalog. So for the top left quadrant, where it was hope and euphoria, the words that we were observing computationally looked like this. Yes! Magandang pagbabago ito para sa bayan. God bless and thank you, Tatay Digong. Watching Mocha and SAS to support. Mabuhay. Right? So that's the kind of hope and euphoria that was being expressed in support of federalism. Still staying on our main diagonal, the fear and skepticism was where the top left says yes, this one says no. No to federalism unless we deal with political dynasties. Stop charter change and attempts to tamper with the Constitution. Duterte just wants to consolidate power like Marcos. In this case, this is referring to Marcos Sr. So the fear and skepticism that was being expressed in this quadrant had more to do not with a good future, right, but with a return to a fearful past. So there was a sense that federalism is not actually about equalizing power and resources, but about concentrating power more within political dynasties through these kinds of constitutional tamperings, etc. But here's where we also get more interesting stuff out of our off-diagonal. For vindictive contempt, puro mga corrupt lang at mga dilawan sa Senado ang ayaw sa federalismo kasi mawawalan sila ng pera at kapangyarihan. Dapat pupunta na lang ang budget sa Mindanao at wag sa Imperial Manila. So here, as you could see, the contempt is righteous, right? Those that oppose federalism are associated now with wanting to perpetuate the concentration of resources and power in this so-called Imperial Manila. And so if you oppose it, you're not actually trying to defend the Constitution, you're just trying to keep the resources for yourself. And that's what justifies that kind of contempt, that vindictive contempt. And finally, I think this is one of the very revealing quadrants for us when we were doing the study was derisive amusement. So how were opponents of federalism expressing positive feelings? Naiintindihan po talaga nilang federalismo ang sinusuportahan nila. I love it. No? I love it. So it was a kind of mockery of supporters of federalism. It was laughing. It was kind of minimizing the struggle that you see so, so framed so righteously in the bottom left. And especially early on in the Duterte regime, where most of this data comes from, it was quite revealing not just of what the groups were thinking and feeling within their group boundaries, but how they were interacting with each other. For those who were supportive of federalism, they saw themselves as underdogs who were finally getting what was due to them. And a little bit soberingly on the right, those that opposed federalism, they saw the underdogs as truly under and saw them as less than them. And that is actually something that I think is worth reflecting on as well. Okay? So that's one of the studies. We are not only telling different stories, we are also feeling vastly different stories. This is not just a verbal or intellectual difference, it's also a deeply felt divide. The same policy can inspire hope and euphoria in one group, and fear and skepticism in another, and these words reveal that. Okay? In another study, this time with hundreds of thousands of Facebook comments about the drug war, we also paid attention to the ways these splits happened not just across political stands, but also deeper divides in language, that is English and Filipino. So again, we'll look at the main diagonal. Those that were supportive of Duterte and speaking in Filipino talked about how Tatay Digong finally made communities safer from the monstrous and demonic addicts, pushers, and drug lords. Only the Dilawan, like the Lima, want to protect them because they are also involved with drugs. Meanwhile, for the anti-Duterte camp, talking about the drug war, they spoke in English. The drug war has resulted in countless extrajudicial killings and human rights abuses. The news media should report these facts, and other nations should witness what is happening in our country. Otherwise, we will continue to see the death of the rule of law and our democracy. Yeah, in this results table, it was translated for the journal, so this isn't in Tagalog anymore, but originally it is. So what you'll notice again with the main diagonal is that it highlights how that divide works, right? On those who are supporting Duterte's side, it's about how dangerous the drug problem is, how dangerous drug addicts and drug lords are, and anyone trying to, go against the drug war as a quote-unquote policy must simply also be involved with drugs. They must simply be involved in some kind of selfish interest. But on the bottom right, it's not about these kinds of personalistic attacks or conflicts. What these people are drawing on are principles like human rights abuses, the integrity of the media, the rule of law, democracy. So they are talking about very, very different things. And what's really interesting is that they're also talking about these different things in different languages. On the top row, it's all in Filipino, and on the bottom row, it's all in English. We did also find there was an off-diagonal that was quite interesting. And again, this was the sort of more counterintuitive kind of result, where for those speaking English that still happened to be pro-Duterte, they were saying, because of the drug war, President Duterte can finally root out narco-politics and incompetence from the government that is supporting the syndicates. The world should understand this is what the people elected as a democracy. So it's kind of in the middle of these two main diagonal quadrants, but while it's supporting the drug war, it's speaking in English, and instead of talking about monstrous mga demonyo, mga addict, it says instead, this is what we wanted as a democracy. This is about, the argument in this quadrant was that the drug war was an expression of democratic principles. Meanwhile, on the top right, another counterintuitive quadrant, I'm less scared of addicts, pushers, and drug lords and more frightened of the police. Children are being killed, and I fear for my life if the drug war doesn't stop. So here, instead, again, it's in Filipino, and kind of balancing the two main diagonal quadrants here, it's opposing the drug war, but not invoking anymore these cosmopolitan values of democracy, truth, justice. Instead, it's about the physical harms that are being imposed by the drug war, the victims, the real people that are affected, right? And so, not only have we constructed very different narratives across what you might see as a chasm of meaning, but these stories are also split up by language. We're polarized in more ways than one. We're literally speaking different languages, and these beg the question of whose language these stories are being told in, who hears which stories and who can comprehend these stories, and what facilitates these kinds of rifts. Maybe it's class, maybe it's education, maybe it's geography. And so our research of the last decade has really shown us a massive rift in our narratives. On the one side, we have some mostly in Filipino and others mostly in English. On one side, we have those that experience hope and euphoria towards the leader and the regime, in this case, the Duterte regime, whereas the other side experiences fear and skepticism. In terms of the intergroup relation, these guys experience vindictive contempt towards their opponents, whereas those here experience amusement and derision. And finally, while those on this side are talking about community security and this rise against the elites, those people here on this side are talking about human rights and the defense of democratic principles. No? So these are just totally different stories, very different emotions, and very different language too. And well, let's move on a little bit for now. So I just want to pause on that point. No? So this is where we've gotten in terms of the narrative side of today. Second, how do we study networks? If you paid attention to the previous slide, it turns out it's kind of similar. It turns out that we can learn a lot about our communities when, like words, we look at the people who are telling the stories. And more specifically, we can use computational social science methods to see which people are coming together and which people come together consistently, again, in a mathematical, statistically significant way. So just like the words, right? And so that begs the question, and I think my Freudian slip is kind of leading into this. What kinds of communities are made up of those of us here? The Ateneo community and our friends and cousins. What communities do we find down from the hill and beyond Loyola? And what stories are told here, what stories are told there? What stories are not told here, and what stories are not told there? Which stories dominate and which ones are silenced, depending on who is doing the telling? Well, it turns out we talk mostly to those who are like us. So hello, Signature Breakthrough Lecture Series. This is a standard social network graph where people are represented as points or nodes, and people who talk to each other are connected to each other using lines or what we call edges. And the colors of the nodes denote some of the properties of individuals. For now, let's just look at them as red, blue, and yellow. This is a very powerful way to represent relationship data because it tells us something about how individuals are not just individuals in isolation, but they undergo or they engage in one-on-one interactions. You might think you're just talking to another person, but as people talk to other people, you also start to see the emergence of groups and things about the overall system as a whole. And what you'll notice here, well, the colors are very well sorted, right? There are very few instances where blue and red are connected, where red and yellow are connected. And that's not the fault of any individual node in this network, but it is a property of the system as a whole. And this echoes a very well-established construct in sociology and social psychology. Birds of a feather flock together. And this is called homophily. You don't have to remember that. But in our studies, we've seen that homophily is not just static but dynamic. No? So we tend towards homophily, but it turns out that homophily is even more of a powerful force when crisis strikes. We are drawn even closer to those most like us when we are experiencing strain or danger or risk or vulnerability. And this is one of the things, this is one of the studies that we did on the United States and the Philippines, where we saw accelerating rates of increased homophily upon the initial declaration of the pandemic. And after a month or so, that homophily began to ease up. It reached a peak. But you can see afterwards, the homophily does decrease a little bit, but at a much slower rate. It's harder for us to let go once we form bonds made in difficult times. So yun yung trauma bonding. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, let's see. As we come together more, it seems our beliefs too seem to resemble each other. And the information we draw upon, just like our communities, gets split up. I'd like to point out this shape. I think you've seen it before because it's in a previous slide. But this is not about words anymore. This is not the words people are using. Instead, it's the news people are reading. It's the images that they share, the videos that they share. And it's shaped kind of very similarly to that other graph that I showed you. This is also a different data set now. But we're seeing that kind of split bimodal, very not normal distribution again. So it turns out that we're, again, not really in the middle, located more towards the extremes. And this refers not just to meaning, but also the things we interact with on the internet. We're reading different news. We're watching different videos. We're seeing different images. So we're seeing the world as different things as well. And one of the things about this study, which was conducted after that other graph that I showed you, is that this is actually based on Twitter for 10 years of discussing the climate change crisis. No? So this is like an extremely large data set, and that's the recurring pattern here. So as with the drug war and federalism, so with climate change. So this is billions and billions of text, and it just looks like that. Okay. So I have this one slide that kind of sums up a lot of the findings that I wanted to share. Narratives and networks can make and unmake democracy. I used kind of slightly clunkier verbs when I showed this to RCWI a few weeks ago, and they were like, no, make it make and unmake. It sounds nicer. And it does, so thank you so much. And this is, I think this is really something that was an important thing to reflect on as I was putting this presentation together. Narratives and networks show us how we come together. They show us how we fall apart. And they show us how we come together in silos in order to deepen our divisions. It seems that when we're talking about democracy, sometimes unity and division are just two sides of the same coin. For a computational social scientist like myself, this has been one of the more depressing things to study and learn about, the fact that narratives and networks are so powerful. As was mentioned earlier, in my doctoral research, I did a lot of work on online hate during the pandemic, and I saw how those same trends of coming together in response to crisis were actually linked a lot to higher levels of hateful talk. So especially directed in the US towards Black Americans, Asian Americans. And hate thrived, where communities tended to be smaller, more isolated, and more hierarchical. So they were they were separated from the rest of the conversation, but they were very organized. And so while it is a divisive emotion, hate is also very powerful as a unifying force. It gives people meaning, it gives people community, that is a narrative and a network, and that allowed them to navigate a historical moment that was shaking the foundations of democracies around the world. We also saw that these were the kinds of systems most vulnerable to the interference of inauthentic actors. I do want to make an important note. There is a pretty prevalent narrative that it is the fault of bots and trolls, that we have become so divided and hostile in societies worldwide, but our data did not actually show that. During the early days of the pandemic, hate and racism spiked almost entirely due to organic human activity online. No manipulation needed. But what inauthentic actors do is they accelerate those harmful human impulses. In other words, hate breeds hate. Interactions with hateful and inauthentic accounts consistently predicted higher levels of hate. And in other words, when you have accounts that are completely dedicated to dousing everything in gasoline, it's no wonder that even tiny sparks can become massive wildfires. Still, what does any of this mean for democracies outside the internet? So far, I've been talking a lot about online discourse. Does it even matter that people are fighting online, right? Or that they're being deceived online? throughout, again, my doctoral research, we wanted to test that idea carefully. We knew that in general, it is offline contexts which produce offline impacts. You implement a law, people's behavior changes. And as we've seen, online influences can also influence online behaviors. What's less well understood are the paths in between these two rows, right? So how do offline conditions invite online influences? How do the bots and the trolls respond to political developments in the offline world? How do these political developments shape online behaviors? And finally, and this is for many the million-dollar question, how does online behavior trigger actual offline consequences? Does it matter, no, that we're all just fighting on Facebook? Whether it was pro-mask or anti-mask, so did it support wearing masks? Did it oppose wearing masks? It could reliably predict how many people actually wore masks after a certain period of time, and how many new infections could be reported in a given city. So over and above the actual diseases, the actual infections today, the actual mask wearing today, if you knew how many people supported this thing online, you could have a stronger prediction of mask wearing and infections later on. Second, we saw that bots and fake news were problems that impacted different places differently. And this tells us a lot about how these inauthentic influences are very targeted. In places with already low mask wearing, which were typically Republican states, false information dominated. So if people are not wearing masks anyway, you're spreading fake news there. Meanwhile, in places with higher mask wearing, that is democratic states, it was there that the bots would swarm. So we were not really sure what they were doing, but we kind of saw examples of them, making fun of people wearing masks, making fun of the leaders who were encouraging that. So these different online harms, fake news, bots, trolls, you don't lump them all together as one big category. They are targeted and they do something specific. So this bottom box tells us that the online can predict the offline, and that top box tells us that the offline can predict the online. What we really saw was interesting was this third box that actually combines these dynamics. We found what we called a backlash effect, where indeed mask mandates worked. They consistently predicted more mask wearing and lower infections, but they also tended to predict more of the bots and the fake news and the anti-mask sentiment, because people were like, no, don't try to force my behavior like this. No? And so that path naman would actually undercut the positive effects of the mandates. So it was not enough to just think about, I will do this offline policy, it will change the offline outcome. Because there's that online layer where things will, can undercut it. In yet another study, we saw once again that in response to crisis, online hate would spike. So when there were more COVID cases, we also saw more online hate. And where there were more COVID infections spreading, people were seeing their online social media saturated with more and more, anti-Asian racism, violent images and videos. And what was really important in this last bit of studies now was that we saw that spikes in online hate would also predict a greater likelihood of actual hate crimes being committed. Again, over and above the already existing likelihood of hate crimes, and over and above the effect of COVID itself. If online you were seeing a lot of discrimination and prejudice against a certain marginalized group, it was also more likely that later on there would be offline violence in that area. So, another synthesis slide. Are we doomed? No, I said, I'll try. Yeah, so when I was, again, putting these slides together, I was like, oh my gosh, my research is so depressing. With so much chaos and unpleasantness in our online worlds, and the way this chaos and unpleasantness bleeds into our offline democracies, what is to be done? When we study our democracy, the stories we tell about it, the ways we tell stories about it to and with others, is the story we get a story of doom? No? Are we doomed? So I don't want to offer hope in a cheap way, because hope is not cheap. Hope is not easy, and democracy is not easy. And it doesn't take a computational social science or a signature breakthrough lecture to know any of that. People already know this. But what I can say is that although a lot of the time our work is spent looking at shadows, every now and then we do get some glimpse of light. Again, during the pandemic, we mapped out the words of the speeches of world leaders and plotted them together on this low-dimensional mathematical space. No need to know the details. It turns out, despite the diversity of stories our leaders told, they could be organized into these 5 big stories. So, encouraging communal cooperation versus stoking national fervor, assuring responsive governance versus enforcing systemic interventions, and upholding global unity. I actually have the stories here. I guess I won't put them anymore, but you can kind of get an idea based on the title. No? So for some leaders, they were focused on controlling the situation through public health measures, through like these laws that they would implement, through programs. Others talked about how we need to work together from the bottom up. Others talked about how great the country was, like we're doing better than everybody else. And others talked about how we're not experiencing this alone. We have to work together as a global community. And it turns out that stories about coming together actually do bring us together. Every country that emphasized different forms of coming together actually did seemingly come together. Countries that emphasized their own greatness saw the highest rates of infection, no contest. Countries that centered the resources and systems they had to combat the pandemic did a bit better. As you can see, the slope of the COVID growth was lower. But it was kind of hit or miss. You can see there's a lot of variance there. Some guys are still up there with the nationalist fervors. No. But countries that said, we will work together with the world, or we will work together here at home, these saw the best outcome. The least disease and the least death. So what I want to say here is that our narratives can change our networks. Because of the way that we tell the story about the pandemic, it changed the way people moved and interacted during a time of crisis. In another recent study, we looked at how a theater workshop between Muslims and Christians in the conflict zone of the Ligawasan Marsh facilitated a shift in the relationships. So this was a group that for a very, very long time had experienced deeply felt conflicts. It goes back centuries. But this was an attempt to have the two groups encounter each other and shift the relationships. And it was very important to do here, to do a lot of interesting calculations. The first was the workshop was located at the geographical midpoint. It's not exact midpoint, but somewhere in the middle between their home settlements. So it was not purely Christian territory, it was not purely Muslim territory. The workshop was facilitated by a datu who had standing with the Christians because he was also an arts practitioner and a scholar, but he also had that high social status with the Muslim group. And finally, rather than promoting both groups experienced two important changes in meaning making. The marsh dwellers, or the Muslims, were reframed from being helpless and dependent on government aid to becoming empowered agents of their own destiny. And Christians were seen less as these militarized outsiders and more as, in the words of our Muslim participants, kakampe. And what I want to say here is when you change the networks, when you change who is talking to whom, you can also shift the narrative. So we come back to this. I'm finally almost done. Okay. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. What kinds of stories do we tell, and what lives do we live, or do we desire to live as individuals, as collectives, as democracies when we tell these stories? Computational social science tells us some things, it shows us some insights, but it does not work alone. While it is an interdisciplinary field, democracy too is endlessly interdisciplinary. Stories are endlessly interdisciplinary. And many questions remain, much work remains to be done. I hope today's lecture provides a good picture of some things that we have seen, the importance of narratives and networks, their challenges and seeming intransigence in our present political moment, and their capacity for change nevertheless. Of course. I also want to highlight that today's narrative would not be possible without my own network, the Political Psychology of Democratization Lab. All these insights that I've shared today are produced and distributed and utilized through the collective effort and imagination born out of long talks, countless drafts, days and nights of doubt and confusion, rare moments of discovery, and so much food. Yeah. So thank you to my mentor who's here, Dr. Tina Montia, and to our wonderful lab members for journeying with me and for journeying with us. So yeah. Thank you everyone for your time and attention. Magandang hapon. What do I do now?
Thank you, Doc Josh. I'm so impressed and hopeful.
Question mark?
Hold on.
Yeah, we have stools.
Okay. But you did end with, and there you did not. Ano yung tanong mo kanina? Are we doomed?
Are we doomed?
Okay. Okay, we're going to do an open forum. So while I wait for some questions, first, if you want to ask a question or comment or share your thoughts, please raise your hand so that someone can bring the microphone to you, or you can go to either of the two microphones here on the aisles. So don't start speaking until you're right in front of the microphone. And please state your name and affiliation. If you're with Doc Josh's lab, or if you were here just to listen, like some of the students said. Just make your question very clear, or if you want to share something, just make clear. But while I'm waiting for these questions, I wanted to ask something, Doc Josh, and forgive me, I'm coming from the journalism world, okay? And I'll try my best to see if I did understand what you were saying, okay? But I was taking notes by hand, okay? So you said online behavior triggers offline consequences, okay? And of course, this was not what you studied, but I was just wondering if you can apply it to this situation. So in March 2025, Rodrigo Duterte flies back from Hong Kong and then is taken into custody at Villamor Air Base before he was flown to the Netherlands, okay? While he was there, it took how many hours, no? Medyo matagal eh. Am I right? Mga morning ba yun? Morning hanggang gabi. Gabi na siya nilipad. While he was at Villamor, there was so much chatter on social media. Ang daming galit. Na, bakit yung ginagawa to sa tatay digong namin, blah, blah, blah. Ang daming no? And then there was a small crowd that was outside the gate of Villamor. Remember the pizza boxes from, what's his name? Bongo. And then people protesting, okay? So I was just thinking, if online behavior triggers offline consequences, then logically shouldn't have these people there been joined by more people, and then they'd storm Villamor and rescue Digong and bring him and fly him back to Davao, no? I don't know. Another is, di ba nag-rally sa INC, okay? And then IME and all these speakers, and IME says, oh, my brother's taking drugs, blah, blah, blah. And then Sarah, in the meantime, at around that time, there was so much talk of military destabilization, okay? Na itong mga opisyal na to, tatalikuran na nila si BBM, etc. And then you had Sarah and her camp, well, how do we say it, waiting to take over? Something like that, no? But again, there's so much chatter, so much talk on social media, online, di ba? Dami sinasabi na dapat mawala, tanggalin na dapat si BBM, blah, 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 no? And yet it didn't happen. How do you explain that?
Okay, thanks for the question. And I think the first thing I will say is that we're actually studying that now.
Really? Share.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so
Come on.
it's still the data collection phase, no? But we already have some like 4 million like
4
comments.
million?
Yeah, yung mga ganun. So
Holy.
of course we the kind of science that we do is very responsive to what's going on in the political arena. So yeah, if that's going to happen, we are going to study it. So we're still studying it now.
Okay.
So we haven't found anything conclusive that addresses that. But based on what I presented in previous studies, I think this is where there's kind of these sorts of paradoxical effects of inauthentic influence. The goal of inauthentic influence, or like bots, trolls, fake information, is to make it seem that there is a consensus. If
Parang there's a clamor
Yes.
that's building na parang papunta na kami ng Villamor pero
Right.
hindi nag-materialize.
Right. So it can make it seem that there's a consensus, because if we think that our group, our community, all collectively believes in something and wants to do something, we do things in relation to our social groups and our social identities. So that's what would drive that. But because so much of these can come from inauthentic sources, then the volume online might actually be an inflated version of the offline outcome.
Yeah, kanina nga you said something like yung kunyari yung initial hate about something,
Yeah.
parang authentic siya, and then para bang I'm not sure if I got
Yes.
if I'm quoting you correctly, para bang na-encourage, parang na something, no?
Yes.
Ng inauthentic, meaning yung mga bots, trolls,
Right.
ganon. So are we, I mean, I know you said you're studying that particular,
Yeah.
no, na Villamor, and also the rallies, no? Itong latest.
Primarily
Hindi.
the reaction to the ICC arrest.
ICC
So
arrest,
all the
okay.
stuff that happens around
Yeah,
it.
so I know it's really early, like you said, you're still collecting the data, although you have 4 million, sabi
Yes.
mo. That form dami, oh. Does it show that there was more inauthentic behavior online na at that time na hindi naman pala talaga, and which is why, in the end, nobody came to rescue him?
So we haven't answered that question yet, but I think one of the ways I want to respond to that question, no, is sometimes it's not about the size of the impact in the offline world. So in that other study where hate online translated to hate crimes offline, sometimes it does not take 1,000 people to do the hate crime. It just takes one. If you can create an online environment where there's a consensus that there's a group of people who are evil or less than or deserve to be punished, sometimes the impact of that in the offline world is not to change the entire society, but to get one or two or a small group really to act on that false consensus. So in this particular case, I think we saw what actually did happen was that the crowds did not materialize. So it's not, in this case, the impact was not about quantitative breadth, but it does still beg the question, were there people who, in a qualitative sense, in terms of depth, really felt that, that we have betrayed our presidential father, or that we've done something that is counter to our own democracy. Because it's that kind of extreme response that can sometimes cause damage rather than like a broad changing the minds of many.
But I asked that, no, because there were some people, and I was reading everything kasi, and it was going all so fast, no? And some people were really calling for him to be rescued, na let him go, we should rescue him, let him go home, pauwiin nyo na lang sa Davao, yung mga ganon, di ba? So, kumbaga, if they really were trying to encourage or drive people to rescue him or to get him out, parang it didn't work because ang kulit ko, no?
No. That's maybe for now. I think these effects that we saw were also like consistent over time. And it may be that in the immediate aftermath, the online change in the meanings did not immediately translate to an offline change in behavior. But perhaps in a year's time, well, it's been a year, or it's almost been a year, these kinds of sentiments will already be more crystallized among the offline public. So it remains to be seen, where that heat will actually go. now that it's been more time for these stories to propagate and for
Yeah.
these actors to influence.
Okay, another question, no, related. So that's March 2025. Let's go back to January 2001. Okay.
Okay.
You were born na then, di ba?
Oo naman,
Okay.
oo naman.
But you were like,
Like that, oh, wala na si Mikel.
but anyway, so we had EDSA DOS, no? And at that time, ano ba yung mga cellphone natin? Pero we had cell phones, but not... Nokia, yeah, okay. So there was, the call for people to go to EDSA was done by what we call the text brigade. Okay, text brigade. Text lang hindi yung, hindi smartphone nga Nokia nga Yung keypad. Tapos wala pang mga, anyway, never mind. But, people went to EDSA, and there was EDSA DOS, no? In other words, what the behavior online was translated offline or something. Okay. Siyempre, hindi naman ako political scientist or ano, no? Pero, so how do you explain that compared to the rescue that never happened at Villamor?
Right. Well, all of those graphics, no, they're really not just about the single path, but the interaction between all of the paths. So the offline conditions produce the offline impacts. The online stuff accelerates it or adds to that effect. So maybe, I'm speculating here also. But I would say that in that particular case, with the Villamor non-rescue, perhaps the offline narratives and networks were not catching up to what was being manufactured online, whereas perhaps in EDSA-DOS, it's not like it happened overnight, right? Like these sentiments, the people wanted to go to that not just because of the text, right? But because of a lot of simmering discontent.
Yeah, the impeachment trial, yeah, that was going on beginning December 2000, and then, yeah, about a month. Okay, yeah. Okay, questions. Yes, sir, the one in the orange, sorry, sir,
EJ.
the one in the orange jacket muna. Your name and affiliation first, please.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm EJ Afilada from the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies. So, good afternoon and thank you for your talk, Josh. I just have a question. Since you mentioned that the coding of comments as either positive or negative is done via algorithm, so I'd like to know, is the algorithm adept at picking up on irony? Is it able to distinguish, for example, a case where a comment says like, "Uy, federalism, go, 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 yes."
Yeah.
But it really means, no, this is a bad idea.
Thank you for the question. This is a very common question in computer science conferences, so thank you for being the one to ask it. So in this particular case, we were very, very mindful. We knew actually that there were algorithms that we could have used, so quote unquote, off the shelf, so existing algorithms that we just download and use. In this particular case, we built it ourselves because we were very sensitive to the fact that in the Philippines, you cannot assume that the way we express our emotions is exactly the same from so-called universal data sets, right? Or actually, they are Western data sets. So when we built our own algorithms, we actually had members of a research team from different parts of the Philippines. So we had different relationships with the concepts of Imperial Manila, with federalism, right? And we manually looked at the predictions. And so it wasn't perfect by any means. There were things that fall through the cracks. That's just the nature of algorithmic prediction. It's not error-free. But we were happy to see that for the cases where it mattered, like very nuanced statements, it was able to capture the patterns that needed to be captured.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, you raised your hand a while ago.
Hi, I'm Carlos Nazareno from democracy.net.ph. So I've read that there are studies that show that common hatred is one of the things that form the strongest bonds among different groups and individuals. Did you see this in your studies?
Yeah, so yeah, I think that is really like one of the overarching themes of my PhD research, that as depressing as it sounds, hate is a unifying force. it's divisive, but it really brings people together like nothing else. So when you measure community interactions through a social network perspective, you can actually get some very precise measurements of the nature of those communities. So we were seeing that, for example, it bonded people together in a way that also separated them from everybody else. So it would like sequester a community of haters. It would also tend to be quite hierarchical. So there tended to be leaders in these little, subunits of the conversation. But in general, yes, every time some hate was increasing in the overall conversation, it was also associated with more clustering, more clumping together of the hateful messages and hateful accounts.
To follow up, maybe there's a more hopeful thing here, like
Sure.
Hatred of extremely visible corruption. Maybe it can unite the Filipinos.
Yeah,
That's it.
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, use hate for good. Well, maybe we don't have to think about it as hate per se, but there is a broader literature also on moral outrage that is quite related. There's some subtle conceptual distinction between hate as something like, destroying specifically a vulnerable group versus moral outrage that can be directed more towards powerful figures. So there are similar patterns there. They're not exactly identical, but moral outrage is also a very unifying force. So I think what you're suggesting could also be an interesting research or practical question.
Moral outrage, like for example, what happened in the run-up to EDSA 86,
Yeah.
EDSA 2,
Right.
halimbawa, no? You said, di ba, hate is very powerful as a unifying force. Isn't there anything else that's very powerful as a unifying force?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, love or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
What? Wala na ba?
Yeah,
I mean,
love.
are we this doomed?
Well, love and joy,
Joy,
and pride.
glimmers.
Yes.
What?
Pride.
Pride, love, joy, glimmers. Ano pa ba, di ba?
What? Santo Niño.
Santo Niño. Viva
Yes.
Santo
Taga Cebu ako, so yes. Yeah.
Di ba?
Yeah,
Para naman
well-
masaya tayo ng konti.
Oo nga. Yeah, maybe I should become a computational social scientist of love na lang. That might be more pleasant for my mental health. I think yes, these are also very powerful unifying social forces. I think what other studies have shown, and not necessarily my own, no, is that again, in a very depressing way, negativity it just moves faster. It also is more sticky. So even after the initial stimulus has left the building, it's harder to remove the impacts of the negativity.
Why? Is it because it makes you feel better about yourself when you're able to hate on someone or something online?
Yeah,
Right?
so there are different
Diba?
theories. Yeah,
Oh.
some people do attribute it to that negative feelings allow you to feel superior, socially dominant. It allows you to justify your place in the world. It allows you to deviate from otherwise very strict social norms, right? Like you can say violent things because they deserve it anyway. So there's a lot of psychological, sociological theories about the benefits or the reasons why these are so effective. Yeah.
Kaya sinasabing social media can be an exhaust valve, di ba?
Yes.
So you can say anything there and you can get away with it if you're anonymous.
Catharsis
Yeah,
siya.
yun nga lang ang problema kapag kunyari magsabi ka, ang pangit mo, ang sagot sa'yo ikaw, parang ganun ba? Don't quote me, I'm just kidding. Sir?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Eric Gutierrez. I work for the University of Melbourne. Thank you, Josh. Outstanding study. I wanted to ask about how you may have come across this, when it comes to the storytellers, how they go through cognitive dissonance. No? So, for example, you are a human rights champion,
Yes.
and yet you find yourself attracted to Duterte politics and cannot get yourself to, criticize. Or you are a pro-democracy, anti-racism campaigner, and then you feel yourself constrained to say something about the Palestine genocide. Those kinds of things, because with Joe and Didion's thing, there's also comes a time when this, and maybe this cognitive dissonance that happens is when belief changes, or I don't know, no, but just wanted to really ask, how given the research that you've done, how something like this can, affects the stories and the storytelling and who the people, the people that the storytellers talk to.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. Cognitive dissonance is, I think, the more classical psychological construct now, where you have maybe one belief, you have another belief or a behavior, and they contradict each other, so it causes you tension or anxiety. You try to resolve it by changing one, or you change the other, right? If my psych teachers are here, I hope I defined that correctly. Good, okay. In social psychology, there's a different concept that I personally find resonates with what I've, the way we've been studying things. It's related. It's called cognitive polyphagia. So it's a little bit of
Cognitive
a
what?
Polyphagia.
Can you spell that out?
P-O-L-Y.
P-O-L-Y. P-H-A.
S-I-A.
P-H-A-S-I-A.
Yes.
Okay.
And the idea here is that rather than try to resolve seeming contradictions, we actually hold those contradictions together. And I think if you look into your experiences, you will find that people don't make sense. Or people are not logically consistent the way an equation would be, or the way a theory is meant to be. People contain multitudes, right? And at any given point, different faces of those multitudes may come out, and in another point, it's a different face. So I think when you look at things less from a cognitive dissonance perspective and more from a polyphagia perspective, the question becomes, shifts from becoming, how are you such a hypocrite, right, towards being more, why is it that you contain those two things at the same time? And what is that process that allows you to hold them together? Why is it that it's this na nangingibabaw today in response to this challenge, and why is it something else in another situation? And I think that helps us understand how, when we are with loved ones, with relatives that we care about deeply, but in our minds, because they don't support the same politics, right? So if you view things primarily through a dissonance perspective, you will think, oh, I don't want to interact with you anymore, right? But from a polyphagia perspective, you realize we have multiple relationships with each other, we have multiple identities, and our politics are constituted by that plurality. So I don't know if that's
Multiple identities, multiple personalities.
Magkaiba mo yun.
Kasi two contradicting things,
Yes.
and then, but I remember, marami ganon, di ba, families that, mga family Viber groups, may umaalis, someone left the Viber group because nagalit kasi somebody said blah, 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 ganon. Pero yung you're saying that, dissonant, cognitive polyphagia. So we can believe different things that are completely opposite. And then you said people don't make sense. When you say people, you're referring to like present day people, or since time immemorial? I mean, human evolution, we started as, and then...
Algae. Okay. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I don't know enough people from time immemorial.
Just kidding. Don't take my questions here.
No, but I think that's a really.
I'm just checking if people are awake.
Are awake.
No, yeah.
So I think
they're awake. Okay.
But I would say, parang, ano ba? I think contradictions really are just part of being human. Ayun lang. You go to church, and then after that, you drink alcohol or something. Like, in an everyday, not necessarily democracy is collapsing stakes. Parang we are always contradicting ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. So when we're talking to a relative who we want to cancel, we just tell them contradictions are human. Ganon?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Are there questions from here, from this side? Don't be shy. It's okay. Wala? None, really?
Courage.
You can also violently object to what Doc Josh said. Are you going to violently object? No, you just want to ask. Just kidding. Yeah, come up to the mic.
Hi, Carissa.
You're student?
No.
Hi, my name is
Coordinate.
Carissa Pobre. I'm an independent writer. I'm really curious actually about the term that you used earlier of polyphagia and the idea of multitudes, no? Especially in an individual person who we can interact with and understand that there are so many contradictions and so we can be friends, ganyan. But on the level of the body politic, when it comes to social composition, what does that, what are some of the implications, you think, of that kind of reality, no? And I was also really interested by one point that you made on the narrative rift, no? That's very present online, diba? That there's this vastly different narrative on one hand and then the other that also, as a tangential question, I'm also curious about if there's any data that you had there as far as class composition, for example, that you could share with us that maybe translate in actual demographic real terms. So yeah, I'm just curious how these multitudes make sense, you know, on the level of the collective if we are, you know, working with a, you know, insert your term here, whole of society, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Carissa. So I'll answer the second half because I think that's easier. We use social media data, and it's just unethical for us to have class information linked to that. No? So we don't know. What we did know was that, you know, certain utterances, certain patterns in the narrative were spoken more in the vernacular, and then certain were more in English. So it's not an exact marker of class or of education, because certainly educated and wealthy people speak Filipino, lower income groups also use English, right? It's not a one-is-to-one thing, but that was the pattern that we saw. The second thing you said about the implication of polyphagia for the body politic. So the theory of cognitive polyphagia is specifically from social and political psychology. So it's not just about plurality and contradictions, holding hands and we're all happy. It's actually very sensitive to power relations. So when we're talking about plurality, even if they contradict each other and they coexist, polyphagia is also sensitive to which meanings are dominant and which ones maybe are subjugated, which meanings are maybe independent of each other and can play with each other sometimes and then ignore each other other times. No? So in terms of the body politic, I think recognizing that plurality of narratives is also about thinking of how power then moves through that plurality. How do you shift narratives, right? How do you produce, distribute, and utilize power in order to transform meanings and the relationships between them and the relationships of the people who carry those meanings. Yeah.
Okay, so that's from, were you raising your hand? Huh? I was about to volunteer you eh.
Go na.
Would you like me to volunteer you? Huh? Oh, please, yeah. Oh yeah, nag-volunteer siya.
Go, Reg.
Hi, I'm Regine. I'm a journalist who also is very interested in this information.
Wait, Regine?
Yes, Kabato.
Oh my God!
Yes.
That's
I'm on
Philippines,
PM.
kaya
Yes,
pala
she was my boss.
nag-volunteer ka eh. No, I wasn't your boss, kau naman.
And Josh is a good friend of mine all the way back from college.
Planted ka rin.
So I'm here to support, of course. Lots of interesting stuff that have come up. I'm really curious, Josh, apart from the Carissa's question on narrative rift, no? Earlier we talked about how there is a possible inflation of these false narratives online, right? And that in turn can impact offline actions or offline perceptions of people. One of the things that I'm curious about is based on the, I guess, more recent research that you're doing, the ongoing research on the ICC arrest. What is the behavior now of Filipino social media users compared to before? Is there more, you think, resilience or awareness to how some of these narratives might be inflated or might be planted there compared to how it was maybe 5 years ago or 8 years ago when you started looking into this stuff? And what does that tell us, I suppose? And moreover, I guess, solutions-wise, how can we move toward making people more resilient and making our narratives more resilient to bad quality narratives from false and manipulative actors? Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Regine. So fun fact, Regine, Carissa, and I were all org mates in college. So it's a nice reunion. Hello, guys. Thanks for the support. So that first question, no, about are we more resilient? I think that is a very, very difficult question, and it's certainly not one I'm attempting to answer, just because but I will address it no, by trying to talk about the difficulty. The context has really just evolved so rapidly that it's hard to say, even if you were trying to measure it, that you're measuring the same thing. In the span of a few years, we now have AI, just like, generative artificial intelligence, just so widely available for anyone to use. And even though, more people are aware of what happened in 2016 in ways that they weren't back then, the tools and the campaigns have also just evolved. So it's very hard for me to try to answer that question in a straightforward way. I think it's also worth asking who might be more resilient than others, because it's not like you can talk about the entire population as a monolithic thing, no? Who is more tuned in to these developments and who might not be? Parang looking at vulnerabilities and resilience as an unequal thing as well. So I wonder what those factors would be that differentiate different groups of the population. So that's just how I would frame it. But honestly, I don't know. I wish I knew. I wish we were more resilient to disinformation. The second thing you said about solutions, again, I wish I had the answer. I think one of the things that consistently comes up in the research that we do is that, at least, maybe harking back to the earlier slides, is that as, recognizing our position as educated researchers speaking English, one of the things we could stand to benefit from doing more is listening. I think if we try to craft our own narratives, just drawing on our own internal experiences and values, we're going to produce narratives that will apply to just us. And by, I think, using your language, will not be as resilient to the quote-unquote bad quality narratives. The narratives that resonate with, the ones that they're trying to manipulate will consciously tap into those values, right? Like if people feel that democracy is not working because there are corrupt leaders, because the system is just rigged so that ordinary people are going to fail, then that allows for certain narratives that justify, let's break that, or let's justify these unusual behaviors or these deviant behaviors in order to address it. So that's, I think, a very psychologist answer for me to give, to listen. Yeah, and then maybe just to add on to that, this would be the political part of the political psychology. Don't believe everything you hear, right? So it's not just about being passively receiving all this information. As political agents, we make decisions about how power is produced, distributed, and utilized, and how we move together with others to change things. So yun, listen and don't believe everything you hear.
Sa dami at tindi ng mga tanong, including Regine's, Ang dami mo nang gagawing study.
Yeah.
How many na? 10?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay. Yes, sir. Which one? Okay. Yes.
Hello, Josh.
Hi, ma'am.
Congrats.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for this talk. I'm Mira from psychology. Sige, favorite natin ng narratives, and I really love your quote from Joan Didion. We can talk about that another time. But my question, I guess, is how you, from your work, no, and especially in the online space, how do you see narratives and networks? Can they be delinked, or are they always linked? And parang in imagining a person, let's say, can a person hear the narrative without a storyteller? Or does the storyteller give it the power? Parang I guess I'm wanting to know if the narrative can have a power of its own, delinked from a network or a storyteller. Or are we still seeing in-group, out-group at play? Just in an online, parang context.
Thank you, ma'am. That's a wonderful question. I think a lot of my work tries to link them. Kasi, but I think, yes, this is not going to come from my empirical work, but maybe more in terms of how I've been thinking about the ways they are related. Narratives and networks are connected to each other, but they don't determine each other. So just because you're talking to a certain group of people does not mean you will believe them and that you will think the way that they do, right? Because you also have a capacity to negotiate those meanings, to resist meaning. Even when everybody else in your network is saying the same thing, you do have the agency to say something else, say something new. So I do think they can be delinked. But I think what this evidence kind of shows is how difficult that can be. It shows that because they tend to be very, very strongly linked, there's a lot of inertia in our narratives. So the meanings that we hold to be true are resistant to change because we hold those beliefs with others who believe the same way. And it's hard for us to get out of that. Our networks also tend to be resistant to change. There's a lot of inertia there as well. But even with that inertia, there remains possibility for change and transformation. And so I think that becomes, again, the more political question, no? Are we just doomed to repeat the patterns that are producing momentum in our day-to-day, or can we change? Can we produce change also? So I think, to just really answer your question, I do think they're not one, parang R squared is not 100%. Parang they do not totally determine each other. And so agency is where you delink narratives and networks.
Okay, one or two more questions from the middle. You're from the middle. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Josh.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your talk. Maybe let's try to deviate away from psychology a bit. I'm Keith Penado from the Department of Physics. Okay, so thank you for the talks on inertia and momentum a while ago. Okay, so I'd like, please, I'm curious about your thought process. Can you walk us through your methodology as to how you would quantify qualitative data? Let's say you're talking in terms of hate, right?
Yeah.
You say it's on a score from -1 to 1, but let's say the word, what do you call this? Love is not equal to the word of hope. How do we quantify those qualitative ideas?
Okay, so I teach a 3-unit course that you can take maybe next sem.
What is the name of the course?
It's an interdisciplinary elective called Data Analytics for Text Analysis.
Okay.
I often get juniors and seniors, and from all different programs. So it's really nice to see like a Pol Sci person work with a CS person, and they've never met, and they do a really nice project together because they bring different complementary things to the table. I guess to answer, you call yourself Keith now. Okay, Keith. Keith's question. There are many ways to study texts, no? Quantitatively, computationally. One of the more common ways is that we look at which words appear together and you project those words into a multidimensional vector space. Basically, you convert every word into a series of numbers, where those numbers are closer together if the words tend to appear closer together. So you always see, cat and dog appear in similar contexts, biology and physics in similar contexts. And so when you have a large amount of text, you can do that mathematical projection accurately. And it's really interesting because there have been studies on this, like over the last decade, where they showed things like king minus man plus woman equals queen within this high dimensional space. No? So the numbers mean something, and they reflect whatever semantic data you have that you're using to produce these numbers. So that's generally it. No? When we look at large sets of comments, for example, if you can project them into that numerical space, then you can see which words come together, which words are split apart, who is using those words, right? So you convert these seemingly just qualitative data, as you put it, into numbers that you can then manipulate and subject to a lot of the more traditional statistical techniques in the sciences. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, wait, there are 1, 2, 3. We can take 3 more, huh? Ali? Tatlo pa, ha? Wait, let's start there. Yeah, that young girl. Go to that microphone na lang. And then one at the back, and then you again, sir. Okay?
Oh, hello.
Hello po. I'm Elvan po from UST Senior High School po.
Wow.
And as gathered by your talk po, Philippine politics revealed that Filipinos were not just divided by opinion, but by lived political realities. So with this, if we are living different political stories, I'm curious on what you think anchors democracy in the Philippines. What happens when societies, or in our case, the Philippines, no longer agree on what is real po?
Okay. Well, first, welcome to this network. Amazing.
From UST daw.
And senior high.
Yeah, and UST, go UST.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for coming.
Okay. Your answer, Doc Josh?
I hope this doesn't sound like a flippant answer, but I think that's just democracy. No. We have been a democracy, and we have been very contradictory, and it's just, I don't know if you want to say that it works. You might say it works, you might say it doesn't, that would be your narrative, no? But that's just how democracy works, with a plurality of narratives, a plurality of lived political experiences. In fact, one could say it's the authoritarian model where you make everything the same. Yeah, so that's how I'll answer.
Okay, the gentleman at the back, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the talk. Vincent Pepito from the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health.
Hello.
So my question is, from all of the research that you have presented, can you give one key policy recommendation? And what's your take? And what's your take on the recent social media bans for the youth in Australia and France?
Thank you. Thank you. Can I not answer this?
No, go naman.
Yeah, well, I want to recognize first that policy is a very different thing from what I do. No? If I tried to call myself a policy, like advocate or a policy think tank person, parang the hat I would wear is very different. And so I don't want to cheapen that, that process by claiming that I can just do it. No? In the same way that I might have difficulties calling myself like an activist, no, even though what I do is political. So parang primarily my identity is researcher, and that can overlap with other things, but I don't want to claim the capital of these other things because that's not my full-time thing. So anyway, that's my first cop-out answer. My second answer, no. I think the research that I did that was most close to having a policy recommendation had to do with the relationship between the mask mandates during the pandemic and the backlash online. No? So really the key policy recommendation there is that when imposing or when implementing certain policies that have that potential to produce backlash, communication really needs to address or it needs to be aware of, first of all, and then address appropriately the kinds of divides that it would, that it would spark. So, yeah, so I think in the pandemic, it was very well recognized. It was not just a health issue, right, but very much a social and political issue. And so the evidence that we had in that study really points to being more sensitive to those dimensions, especially in a very politicized society. So I don't know if that counts. Thank you for the question.
Okay, one last final question.
Hello again, Josh.
Hello
This is
again,
Carlos
Naz.
Nazareno again.
Yeah.
Thank you for the brilliant presentation and answers. My question is, do you have any suggestions for reducing or mitigating political polarization? Because it's a really big problem right now, and it's been engineered by influence operations, like us versus them, tribalism, etc.
Thank you. That's a policy recommendation in disguise. Thank you for the question. Same things as I said earlier. I don't want to claim to have the answers, no. But I think some of the answers that have been forwarded, one is networks of truth. I think that does actually have some credence as like a strategy. So those actors that are very conscious about democratic values and truth rather than falsehoods need to be more organized and need to talk to each other more. I'm sure, and I'm not saying that they don't. Hi, Reg. I'm not saying that they don't and they're not already doing that, but I think that is really the path, one of the paths forward. That bigger tents, basically, bigger coalitions that believe in these more fundamental things, even if there are disagreements on other things. So that's one. In other contexts that are not maybe the Philippines, they've found that certain things, like I think it was brought up earlier, like banning social media. So certain legislative actions would also be helpful, I think. But in the Philippines, it's very tricky, right? If we had like an anti-fake news law in a place where, we often associate disinformation with state actors, no? Parang giving the keys to the social media to lawmakers might not necessarily be the best idea. And so, absent that, civil society also has to play a very important role. Yeah, I think that's all I have for you. But thank you, Naz, for the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Josh Uyheng, and thank you for all the questions.
Yeah.
All the questions that put you on the spot.
I know.
And will mean that we can look forward to your study, or what do you call it, study, your research on love naman.
Yes.
Or joy.
Right.
Or hope.
Right.
Whatever.
Like I ended with my presentation earlier, I don't do any of this research by myself. Practically all of my papers are co-authored with people. So here are the
Maybe we should ask them to stand up nga.
Oh, mag-stand up kayo. So if
Nahiya pa kayo, come on, it's okay.
So the questions we pursue will also intersect with the questions I'm interested in, they're interested in. So kung gusto nyo ng love, pag-aaral tayo ng love.
Para naman, di ba?
But yes, thank you so much.
Pero baka ang daming, may unrequited love, may mga ganun daming. Wag na, stick to stick to hate. Sige.
Stick to hate.
Okay, we were supposed, Ali, di ba, we were supposed to have Father Bobby give some closing remarks, but he's not here. Sorry. Dr. Aguilar na lang. Okay, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Josh, and to everyone who's here. Thank you for being part of this afternoon's signature event. On behalf of Father Bobby, who is unable to be here, I'd like to read a few words from him. So, as he wrote here, thank you, Josh, for the gift of your time, your mind, your work, and for your generosity in sharing your ideas with the community. Thank you everyone here in this hall as well as those online for staying with us and spending this afternoon in an atmosphere of attention, patience, wonder, and even hope, despite the very negative things that we heard about. And from the point of view of the LID priority areas, I'd like to say that we hope you will not give up on that priority area of bridging cultural divides, despite the fact that the imagery we saw in the slides really. Thank you for continually upholding Ateneo's excellence and high standards. Your daily labor is often hidden while you do your research. Those long hours, even for some of us, failed experiments, or archives that do not yield the documents we're looking for, unanswered questions, and sometimes really very, very difficult issues that our computational science may only bring us up to a point, but never really fully bring us to a full answer. As we grapple with all of this, we hope that you will continue to take courage and continue on and pursue your research. But in those very difficult moments, that is exactly where integrity is formed and where real excellence becomes credible. And it is precisely here in those difficult moments, in those gaps, that we see our mission in action, to continue to search for truth, no matter how difficult it is, and to do our research not just for ourselves, but to be of service to others. This is why days like this matter. Breakthroughs are not only the results that we publish in very prestigious journals, but breakthroughs also happen when we awaken curiosity, and I should add, when we continue to hope, despite the evidence to the contrary. In the Ignatian spirit, we know that learning is not merely accumulation, it is discernment, it is formation, it is becoming persons who can hold complexity without losing compassion. Dysphagia, polyphagia. But polyphagia with compassion, it may be a different character, a different face. So we hold contradictions in tension without losing compassion, and persons being persons for others, being persons of prayer, persons of joy amid sorrow, so that our pursuit of truth leads us outward toward justice, mercy, if not the actual solution of problems. And so today we launch Ateneo Breakthroughs, and our hope is simple, that these gatherings become spaces where rigorous research meets public imagination, where excellence meets service, where we remember that our God is a God of surprises, and that the future is best faced with both courage and hope. We continue together to find light and to share it. Maraming salamat, Josh. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat, Pia. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aguilar, and of course, kay Father Bobby na rin, for your unwavering support for research, creative work, and innovation. I think there is a solution to online hate. Let's go analog instead. So on behalf of the organizers, thank you to our speaker, Doc Josh, na malapit nang gumawa ng study on love, joy, glimmer. Our university leadership, Dr. Vilches, Dr. Marlu, our partners, and all of you here in the audience, for your questions, for your cooperation, for your warmth, and for your enthusiasm for what Doc Josh just presented. We have refreshments outside. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Picture pala. Sino? Okay. Everyone? How? Groupie? Groupie? Selfie? Okay. Sorry. Photo. Sige, sige.